Welcome to our next episode of No Reserve, where we take on our favorite topics: art, money, and even better, art and money. When it comes to art and business, we could think of no one else who's done both so well as Tom Hill. So we went to Tom's foundation in Chelsea to see his new exhibition. Tom, it's nice to see you. We are probably the only two men in Manhattan wearing dress shoes at the moment. So I'm glad to see.
And we're the only men in New York not wearing masks, so I have to say it's really refreshing. Good to see you, Josh.
We're glad to be at your foundation. And tell me a little bit about your passion for art versus your passion for business and how they relate.
Well, the two related because when I didn't have any money, it's very hard to collect art. You can start around the edges, but over time, if in fact your business is going well, then your options expand. So you have a chance to actually express a view by greater choice of art. And back in the 80s, when I was just married, had no money, we were collecting Dutch still lifes, Neergaards and Jensens, from the 18th century. And that was fine. But coming from a family where my sister teaches art, my mother was an artist, never sold a work, but we have a lot of her works in our homes. I went to museums, and my mother was a great coach. So business and collecting can often be compatible. I don't know if you know Michael Finley. But he's written the book called The Value of Art. And in The Value of Art, he talks about why certain people collect. Some people collect because they have a passion. Some people collect because they see it as a trophy and wall candy, where if you have a certain artist, then, well, I recognize that artist. And then other people collect as an investment. And at the end of the day, if you're in the last two categories, the wall candy and the investment, I don't think it really works out so well. I think the people who really end up with the best collections are those who have done it out of passion because they find a way to express themselves through the art.
Does their passion mean that they tend to buy the best piece, and the best piece has a better chance of being a masterwork because they felt it rather than they analyzed something?
I think it's a combination of what you feel and the passion plus a big component of research, because you can be passionate about a work of art, but it may not be in a particular oeuvre the very best work. And if what you're trying to do is collect the best of an artist and of a given body of work, then you have to do the research. If you don't do the research, you can't actually make those judgment calls.
But you can do the research and still not have it.
Oh yeah, a lot of people, kind of paint by the numbers and collect by the numbers.
The Basquiat's got to have a head. There are all these rules.
Yeah.
And they get lost in the rules, and the market takes over on the rules. Kooning has to be from this period. The Basquiat's got to be from that year. We can't have, that Warhol's too late, even though it's 70s, and all these rules. And do you find that the art world is actually more prudish and conservative than the business world?
I find that most of the risk taking is around speculating on a work of art or an artist that has a chance of going up. And to me, that is a fool's mission, because you have no idea what's going to go up or not. And all these data sets that say, well, we look at the momentum, and I'm now working for a computer software company that manages money, and we've got 220 PhDs, and we could not use data to predict whether a given work of art is going to go up in a year or 2 years. It doesn't exist. Whereas we can with stocks. We can predict.
Do you think if you had a better algorithm, you could do it?
I don't think so, because it's garbage in, garbage out. And when you're using data, you have to have data sets that are relevant and consistent, and they don't exist in the art market. Now, if in a perfect world you had perfect information and all the data, which nobody has, even a dealer like, take Christopher Wool, whom we collect in depth. Loring Augustine knows where every single work is, who has it, has documented it, and even with perfect records, there's some transactions that they don't know about, where a work of art was sold. Now, maybe with blockchain, we can get to a point where that becomes, there's more transparency, where you will have predictive powers. But the fact of the matter is, anybody who buys a work of art because they think it's going to go up is a fool. I mean, when I was buying Warhols in the 90s, I had no idea that they were going to be worth what they're worth today. But Andy hung out at Harvard in the late 60s, and would be sitting, I'd be coming back from writing at the Lampoon. I was back when I had a sense of humor, and Andy would be there with his entourage, and you could sit down, and he wouldn't say much, but he was there with his Polaroid and recorder, and he was just hanging out at Harvard.
Lest you only think that we talk about art in relationship to money, we were interested in a show that's clearly not that financial, at least on the surface. So we sent our correspondent, Vajra Kingsley, our head CMO, out to California to see Desert X. How was it, Vajra?
After a year of no traveling, it certainly was great to get back on the road and flex my art muscle. Being able to see art in the landscape, I think, was a great way to get back in the swing of things before the art fairs and the general circus of seeing art every month turns back on. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did.
I think what a project like Desert X does is continue the legacy of land art in some ways. I mean, I think it takes the anti-institutional and the anti-material thrust of it and applies it to a contemporary context. It's really a way of creating an arena for art and for its appreciation that's outside of institutional walls. And I think its popularity is largely to do with that, because what we find is that the threshold for entry is much lower. All the sort of social and architectural barriers that one encounters with traditional institutions, museums or galleries, whether it's the front desk person or the fee to get in the museum, those are lifted, and that's an essential part of this experience, I think. I mean, the idea for Desert X has really been around since the beginnings of land art, but it was Susan Davis who approached me, and I think she'd been to Cartagena and seen the biennial there, which was spread over the entire city. But she'd also seen what I'd been doing in Switzerland, in the Swiss Alps, with a site-specific show called Elevation 1049, which was really about taking the landscape as the source of inspiration for artists and, in a way doing something that was slightly different from public art, which is creating works where the landscape is really generative. Desert X, for me, as much as I'm function as a curator, and in this most recent edition with César as a co-curator, it's really the landscape that's curating the show.
An early conversation between Neville and I about how we wanted to work together was that we were going to sort of build this show from the kind of concerns and questions that artists had. One of the first conversations I had with an artist was with Eduardo Sarabia, and we had a conversation about our moms and about this desert being a place that our own parents have this difficult relationship with. And he sort of made a comment about wanting to make sort of a memorial or an homage to migrant mothers. And so his piece, The Passenger, is very much about that, about the migrant experience. This is a border region. We're very close to the U.S.-Mexico border. It's an agricultural community. There's a huge population of Latino people that live here. And so Eduardo, whose work is usually very bright and dynamic, opted to make something incredibly contemplative. And he made this maze structure out of petates, which are hand-woven, dry palm leaf sort of mats that people used to sleep on and often bring with them on a migrant journey to sleep on in the desert. And he created this structure that allows visitors to find themselves lost within the desert landscape for a little bit, as a kind of, poetic gesture about what it might be like to navigate this terrain.
In terms of the legacy of land art, I think one of the questions that a show like Desert X raises is whose land this so-called land art occupies. And so it was really exciting with Nicholas Galanin's project, Never Forget, to be able to address that. And, as you know, it's a riff on the Hollywood sign, which obviously has this very kind of dark political history to it. And I think one of the reasons that it becomes successful in a context like this is that it invokes all that Hollywood mythology, which might appear to be benign, and in fact it's an Instagram magnet, the piece itself. But then there's this cognitive dissonance that takes place between, the image that's captured and, the dark sort of genocidal history that it represents. So I think in that space, in that sort of liminal space, in that dissonant space, is where the magic of a lot of this show takes place. And as much as the artworks themselves are, the draw, the attraction, it's also the spaces in between them. It's the journey, it's the kind of attention that they ask that you pay to the desert in the broadest sense, a sort of self-consciousness about how one exists in a certain space that may or may not be your own space, is really what I think the show is about.
Back to New York City, where money really rules, we go to the auction houses to see the two women powerhouses of Christie's and Sotheby's, Sara Friedlander and Amy Cappellazzo, tell us what's going to happen this week at the auctions.
I'm very excited to discuss this 1982 Basquiat we have coming for sale next week. So there's so much about this painting I really love because when I look at a Basquiat, of course I look at the totality of it and the impression that it gives me and the sort of impact that it has. But I also look very closely at the lexicon of Basquiat isms that are signature and characteristic of his work, and I like to see a lot of them. And this painting has a lot of them. So the title, After Medici, of course, references the great Renaissance patrons, and Basquiat having the highest ambition for his own art and for art history. To reference the old master collectors, the Medicis, is its own kind of, that took kind of savvy and swagger and balls, and I really love that he did that. And it has, in terms of Basquiat isms, I love the crown, very signature for 1982. I love the text and the scroll and the handwriting and the reference to, ancient Greco-Roman mythology. I love the reference to Gray's Anatomy, which we know to be a very important book for Basquiat. His mother had given it to him when he was a small child. He was hit by a car while riding his bike and had his spleen removed, and his mother had given him Gray's Anatomy to study the body. So when you see references here to elbow, arrow, things of that variety, you see that. Also intestines and entrails and everything inside is also that kind of reference as well. I love the ambition that you'd kind of try to do Picasso. So like that forky hand, particularly this one up here, this one below, is very, very Picasso in his maybe kind of 20s, 30s period. I think of that Romanesque period with these big clunky hands and clunky feet in Picasso. And I think this painting just has many, many things that you want in it. It just speaks very clearly for those of us who even remember 1982. This is exactly what 1982 Basquiat works felt like, with all that impact and like Pow! Pizzazz.
We're standing in front of Jean-Michel Basquiat's 1983 seminal masterpiece, In This Case. René Ricard said, if Cy Twombly and Jean Dubuffet had a baby and gave the baby up for adoption, that baby would be Jean-Michel Basquiat. And here he is at 22 years old, not a baby, already 2 solo shows in New York, included in the Whitney Biennial, but he's 22 and constructs this unbelievable large-scale head. Now this is comes from a series of 3 paintings, one of which you'll recall Sotheby sold in 2018, which remains the most expensive price for a work of art by an American artist. The second one is, of course, in the collection of the Broad, and here we have the third one. In This Case, obviously features this incredible head form and really plays on Basquiat's continued investigation of Gray's Anatomy and those kinds of drawings that he would have seen and researched. Da Vinci, also at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but also this incredible burst of abstract expressionism and energy. Dieter Burckhardt also alludes to the murder of Michael Stewart as part of this painting, which was a very important murder case that happened in September of 1983. And Michael was a young graffiti artist, much like Basquiat himself. They ran in the same circles. Jean-Michel was very affected by this police brutality and took several months to finish this painting in its wake. We're estimating in the region of $50 million for this, and I would expect there to be some competition. You know, Basquiat was incredibly prolific when you look at how much he was able to produce in a relatively short lifespan, but masterpieces like this, we don't see all every day. Be sure not to miss Things by Urs Fischer, the explosive and grand scale sculpture that we have in Gallery 9. Urs is one of the most fantastical magicians of all things three-dimensional working in art right now. This is a 3D cast of a rhino, a taxidermied rhino, that has all of these different man-made things, printers, phones, vacuum cleaners, shoes that come through the body, really causing the viewer to think about all of the different man-made things that come through our bodies. We at Christie's are lucky when we are entrusted with a collection of art that is sold to benefit any philanthropic organization. We're particularly excited about Art for Acres this season, Haley Mellon's groundbreaking initiative to match funds and donations through the sale of works of art. We're particularly grateful to Dana Schutz, who made the incredible Fisherman painting from this year. You should see it here, and you should also go to David Zwerner to see the amazing exhibition that she has up right now.
I was having a long conversation with Thelma Golden about this painting. She was reminding me that this was the centerpiece of her exhibition, Black Male, that was at the Whitney Museum in the mid-90s. And what a kind of a crazy, controversial, polarizing, but possibly incredibly exciting moment in the art. I can't think of a moment that was that charged and attenuated, where everybody saw the show and everybody had an opinion, and it was not just a New York conversation, but really a national conversation about that exhibition. And this painting was the centerpiece. And she also said it was one of the most important paintings in her life and career in the arts ever. And I too had that same feeling about it. So as we all know, it is based on the Liuzzi painting that hangs prominently at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, about 20 blocks from here. And that painting, for those who grew up in New York or are longtime New Yorkers, know that that painting is never off view. Like, it is nearly always on view. And there's that very dignified portrait of George Washington in the boat with his crewmen crossing the Delaware. And I do always imagine it would be amazing to have this picture opposite that, since this picture was made in direct reference and in direct response to that. In 1997, Robert Colescott represented the United States at the Venice Biennale. And he was seen as a sort of outlier candidate for that selection. The European reaction was blasphemy. Like, they just thought it was like, you know, nonsense and caricature and kind of like embarrassing and unappealing in that way. And very interesting enough, I had some old guard European dealers come in here, and they were like, I don't really get this painting. And I was like, these are kind of the mainstays of our market. And I laughed and I said, don't worry, because our very sophisticated algorithm here would never in a million years have you as bidding on this painting or even understanding this painting. So don't worry, this is a different art world, you're okay. And in terms of paintings that get reproduced in textbooks, in curatorial essays about the progression and discussion around identity and race politics, this is probably numero uno, I would say. So we were brave in wanting to present it at auction. We think it's an utter masterpiece. It will be impossible to get this painting again, I believe, and I hope whoever buys it will make sure it has access to public view, at least some of the time, because it's that important.
Just in case you weren't sure whether art is a financial asset, we brought together 3 leading people in the art market: Jeffrey Deitch, Glenn Fuhrman, and a young face from Christie's who gives us a perspective from Asia too. We're at the Flag Art Foundation, obviously to introduce the John McEnroe for Mayor Committee to the world. But in fact, we are talking about art as a financial asset. We have Jeffrey, Aisi, Glenn. Glenn is our host here at the Flag Art Foundation. So yes or no, Glenn, is art a financial asset?
Well, I think art can certainly represent an important part of an asset allocation. Putting the word financial in front of it makes me uncomfortable, but I would say I think most collectors that have collected for a long period of time and that are passionate have ended up building up a reasonably worthwhile and valuable portion of their overall asset allocation. They probably didn't start out thinking, here's my overall pie and I want to have this in art for this reason. They just loved art and were buying art and ultimately woke up one day and realized the slice of their overall pie was pretty big. And I would say that's certainly how it happened for me. I never set out to build an art collection of value as part of an asset allocation, but because art has been a great investable asset and has grown in investment value, it just happens almost by accident if you love art and you just keep collecting art over a long period of time.
Well, we're joined by actually the founder of art as a financial asset in some ways, Jeffrey Deitch, who created the art program at Citibank, what, in the 18th century, I think it was? Back, it
many
feels
decades
like
ago.
Many decades ago, after you'd been an artist. So yes or no, Jeffrey, is art a financial asset?
It's not a yes or no question, but of course I'd have to answer yes. But like Glenn, you have to qualify it. Art is a financial asset, but completely unique, unlike any other financial asset. There are so many other aspects to it. There are all kinds of changes in history. So since I've been involved, sort of my real learning experience was during the Japanese bubble period. Okay, so this was another period where very low interest rates. So someone in Japan could borrow money at essentially 1%. It was free money. And art investment became a fad. And it was truly a bubble period. And when there was the ultimate reckoning, the art market had its biggest collapse that I've experienced in my lifetime around 1990, where for some prices, they went down 80%.
So if you opened a big new gallery in, I don't know, September 1990 and built a space 5 times as big as your previous space, that probably was bad timing. I'm just thinking about the Josh Baer Gallery opening in 1990 in its new space, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that from my little space in Soho to my huge one. Probably not a good move?
Your timing wasn't that great, but it was a terrific gallery. That was one of the, that was a beautiful loft, Josh. I loved the shows you did there.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
We should point out that of all the market declines in the 1990s, early 90s, the great artists, the values recovered, and within 7 years, higher than ever before.
Well, that's the definition of a great long-term investor, right? I mean, the stock market goes up and down, but over long periods of time, it has been a steady incline. And certainly for great art, even those prices that peaked at the Japanese period you're talking about, you know, Van Gogh's portrait of Dr. Gachet, even though I think nobody knows where it is, it would definitely sell for more than the record that it made at that time,
It'd
for
probably
sure.
Be probably double what it sold for then.
Correct.
Well, as John McLaughlin Group would say, the answer is yes, art is a financial asset, but let's go a little deeper. We're now at a point where the relationship of art to money has gotten so quick with NFTs being brought, no one heard of it, most people, a month ago, then it's all about the money. Are you finding that the discussion of NFTs, and certainly at Christie's you sold one for $700 million, was it, or 70 million Bitcoins or something like that? Do you see a relationship that's different there for your generation and for the auction house?
Yes, so, well, the world is changing. We're going to a new era with that fabulous result of Beeple NFT auction result. Now there are a lot of, like talks and discussions about how do we consider NFT as art first and then as a financial asset second. I think it's really interesting and it's still an open discussion. But to the new generation of collectors, something really makes me, like excited is that the way that they look at art is really different. How they define the quality and how the variety of perspectives they hold when they decide how much money they pay or what kind of pieces they want to acquire is all different. So I think that will also relate to the asset question. Do they consider it as just part of the asset that the family holds, or it's a consumption that just make them happy for the moment? It's still open.
Jeffrey, as a gallerist, how much of your time when you're talking to, either as an advisor, which you are, and a gallerist, talking to collectors is about the art, and what percentage of the time is about the money? NFTs aside.
It's 80-90% about the art. Because see, like Glenn, the people who I'm lucky enough to work with, it's really the motivation is building a great collection. And they take it for granted that if they do it right, it's also a great asset. But see, almost every great collector, it starts with the art and understanding of the art and the connoisseurship. The money comes along. And I think probably in your experience too, the people who start with the money, like, how am I going to make money with this? It's distorting. It takes them away from what this is really about. And I have very interesting examples where a few of the collectors I work with were tempted to just make some investments, art that they didn't really like, because, well, why not? Give it a try. And it took them off course. And the really great asset that they built was the core collection that they deeply understood and were deeply involved with.
But I'm going to say 80% of my talk with my clients is about the money.
Really?
But it's when we're over a certain threshold of price point. So on a $15,000 work, it's not about that. But if it's $5 million or $1 million, we've already gotten past the point pretty quickly of that's a great work, and that's kind of clear. And then a huge percentage of the time, I find, is about that because they're making choices of this or that. I'm always encouraging them that it's better to pay more for a better piece. In the long run, your where you get to will be far greater. I'm sure all of you agree with that. But it's still a large portion of my time. How much of your time is spent talking, not, again, with your clients? You're in the marketplace, there's a price on it, there's an auction, about the money rather than the work.
A lot of new collectors that I've been working with, money and the price tag is the reason why they started to pay attention to art. So, well, that's where they start, and as you know, like they have the exploration, more experience, they know why, you know, like different art with different price tag right now is because of the quality and how to look at the quality, what's the standard. That's a journey. And there are a lot of, you know, like wealthy people from different industry, but they don't necessarily want to buy art. So I feel for whoever who has the calling to get into this field, there must be, you know, the very deep down love of art first. Just the language that they use or they feel most comfortably used is probably mixed with, you know, like price and money.
So I'm very radical and take a lot of risks in what I show, but I'm very financially conservative. So no, I do not want to have, even though I'm one of the people who introduced this whole possibility, I don't like to leverage against my own art. I don't want to be caught in a situation where I'm going to have to unload pieces that are so meaningful to my life.
I mean, to some extent, that is the definitional answer of your earlier question, is it a financial asset or not? If the fact is that Citibank and JP Morgan and other banks will very happily lend you against your art collection at like LIBOR plus 200 or less. So you're talking about 2, 3, 4% for, you know, depending on the person and their credit rating. That's a pretty incredible statement that you can borrow against your art collection at such a low interest rate. And yes, there's no doubt, I know a lot of people that are taking advantage of that.
And the issue is art's still not very liquid. So if you need that money, that curve that steady works in the stock market. You can sell your Enron stock on its way down.
But I would say, Josh, the market is evolving in a way that makes art more investable for those who care about those things. Transparency has never been higher, that you can actually see the levels where things are trading.
It's a broader market.
It's a global market. You know, you could argue whether this makes sense or not, but whether you're in Arkansas or Korea or Japan or China or Saudi Arabia, they all want to own the same artworks, right? So there is this kind of growing universe of demand, which is good for the long-term viability of the business. And there are more places to go if you had to sell quickly. There's more places with deep pockets. There's dealers that either themselves or as teaming up with other dealers can write big checks to buy entire collections if you need to at a given moment. Sotheby's and Christie's and Phillips are more liquid than ever. They can make a bid if they have to. Guarantees are relevant. That's another way. So I think people can be a little bit more comfortable with the way the market has evolved over time. But of course, it's still very illiquid. And if you need to sell, art is not something that you want to have to rely on.
Well, I want to make a contrast between the classic blue chip stock investment and an art asset. So years ago, I filled my IRA account with really solid stocks, and one of them was General Electric. And thought, well, that's the most solid company in America. You know, so I just bought General Electric stock, parked it in my IRA. I never even thought about it. Okay, so now I'm the age where I can liquidate something from my IRA without the negative tax consequences and put it into something that might perform better. And to my astonishment, the decline in the value of General Electric is really shocking to me. But my Andy Warhol works, you know, maybe they don't have the same sort of yearly percentage return as the hottest stock, but they're not going down. And so I'm more comfortable with the Andy Warhol works in my asset portfolio than in blue chip stocks.
But there is no doubt, however, a corollary to that might be tastes do change in the art world, and Andy Warhol may not be one of them, and he may be an artist that's desirable for forever. But there have been many artists that were considered blue chip at different points in time that people thought were the equivalent of GE, that for whatever reasons, taste changed, people lost interest in that period.
Yeah, so one of the lessons, if you are thinking of art as an asset, it needs to be of international importance.
Yeah.
And it was something that happened of an earlier generation of the hot Chinese contemporary artists, tremendous declines in value. And see a number of the Chinese collectors I know, they've switched, they only want to buy art that is valued internationally.
We had two different views there. Art 90% of the dialogue, or money 90% of the dialogue? I think both, as Yogi Berra would say, it's 90% each. Join us next time with No Reserve.